So this was actually a conversation that I wanted to just track him down to have, just to talk about the COVID vaccine, the updates, the innovation that we've seen, and especially over the past few weeks, we've seen a lot of important news that's been coming out. And right before we get into this phase of vaccine distribution, I thought it would be great for us to just all convene and talk about, what the pharmaceutical industry has done over this year, and what they plan on doing for this next phase of vaccine distribution.
This is not the first coronavirus. There are 5 others or 6 others that cause disease in humans. So this is not it's a novel coronavirus, but it's not the first coronavirus. We knew a little bit about coronaviruses and we know a lot about vaccine development. And so we were able to take that knowledge and apply it really, really quickly. I showed this picture of the virus because I think it's helpful for me, again, simple brain, to think about looking at the virus and trying to understand how we're targeting the vaccines. Because of the spike protein that sits on the outside, one of the early theories in the kind of super smart vaccine world, the Dr. Fauci's of medicine, decided that the target for the vaccine should be this spike protein. And, it seems, would trust almost anything that Dr. Fauci says. But the amazing thing about science is we didn't know that that was going to actually work until we did clinical trials to find out. But I think a lot of people hear vaccine and they immediately think, oh, I'm getting like a deactivated form of COVID. And what if I get sick from it? What if I actually get COVID from the vaccine? And that's really not, that's like classic vaccine technology from years ago. The idea of the leading vaccine candidates, meaning the ones that are furthest along right now, is this mRNA technology, which is super cool, not yet been deployed, but makes a whole lot of sense. And it clearly is extremely effective. The mRNA approach is being looked at by Pfizer and Moderna. The other kind of leading candidates, meaning furthest along, are the vaccine adenovirus vector approach that J&J and AstraZeneca with Oxford have partnered to develop. There might be certain populations that respond better to different vaccines. So having a lot of data and a lot of vaccines out there is generally a good thing. The mRNA approach, the best analogy I heard about this, I read it in an NPR article, is to think of the mRNA vaccines like a M&M, where the chocolate is the mRNA and then the outer shell is the kind of fat coating that it's encased within. M&Ms, if you didn't encase them in that kind of outer shell, the chocolate would melt. mRNA, similarly, very quickly degraded. It's transient. It's not going to live in your body forever. It's just a little shard of mRNA that you get in an injection. Your body takes it up. Your ribosomes make whatever it codes for. The mRNA is gone in a couple of days. And the hope is that whatever it made, in this case, the little spike proteins, your body recognizes those as foreign and then develops antibodies against them. And then those antibodies protect you against COVID down the road if you ever get exposed. So the efficacy rates are upwards of 95%, which puts it on par with some of the most effective vaccines ever invented. You think about the flu shot, which is like 40 to 60% effective. I think measles is 98. These being 95 are really, really up there. These are like the best childhood vaccines that we have. So we've had a ton of really good news. AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson are both still in phase 3 clinical trials with adenovirus vector vaccines. And then Moderna and Pfizer, both studying mRNA vaccines, they are seeking FDA authorization. And what that means is they injected, thousands of people, in a 1-to-1 ratio, some of them getting vaccine, some of them getting placebo. I'll take the Moderna trial since that's the one that I'm in. Moderna did enroll 30,000 people. I went in August and got my first shot. I went in September and I got my second shot. And then I was told to just live my life. And they checked in with me every day. I didn't get COVID, but 196 people in the trial did. Of the 196 people in the trial that got COVID, 186 of them, or 184, something like that, sorry, were in the control group, the placebo group. So those people just got saline in their arm. And then a small number of them, like 10, I believe, had gotten the vaccine. Of those infections of COVID, 30 of them got severe COVID, meaning like they needed to be hospitalized or they needed to be intubated. One of them actually died in the trial. And all of those people, all 30 of them and the one person that died, all got placebo. So the COVID infections clearly were less severe and nobody died in the vaccine group. So that's where they come up with that 95% efficacy number. And
can you talk a little bit about any data that you're aware of between, something like giving antibodies passively or giving the vaccine or getting the virus infection, and what type of immune response each of those elicits?
Sure. So I think the hope is that the vaccine might elicit a more durable immune response than even a natural infection. And I think there's been a little bit of literature out there that that might be the case. We know that people that get infected with COVID do have immune response, but there have been case reports, or I guess now reports, of people getting infected for the second time. It's thought that those people maybe got kind of a mild form the first go around, and so they, were susceptible to a second infection. So it's possible to get infected. Immunity likely does wane at a certain point, but there is a duration of immunity. And again, but only 10 months in, it's just going to take more longitudinal data to say what. But there is some hope that the vaccines might provide a little bit more of a durable immune response.
Then specifically between the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, because there are a lot of vaccine candidates, but those are probably going to be the two ones that are introduced to the United States and around the world soonest. Can you talk about the differences between the requirements for each of those vaccines? Between, I'm pretty sure that both of them are two dosages, but as far as the storage and transportation of those, and how you envision those being used differently.
Yeah, sure. So I think the Pfizer vaccine is 21 days apart, I believe. I know mine, the Moderna one that I am enrolled in the trial, is 28 days apart. So that right there is going to create some just challenge logistically. The vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, as I mentioned, because of that M&M analogy, that it's kind of chocolate that can really easily melt, or mRNA degrades very quickly. You do need to wrap it in lipids, and so that's what I think that they are, but to be honest, this is proprietary stuff, so I don't know exactly, but it has to be kept frozen at a very low temperature. Pfizer's, I think, is like around negative 110 degrees. Moderna's is a little bit warmer than that, but still pretty frozen. Some of the newer, or some of the ones that are still in development, the phase 3, the adenovirus vectors, I believe those can be refrigerated at kind of normal refrigerator temperature. So that's another reason why it's kind of good to have multiple approaches.
So one of the most historical critiques about clinical trials is that they're not diverse enough. And knowing that this virus hits communities of color harder than others, do you feel that the pharmaceutical companies have done enough to make sure that these vaccine candidates won't add to the harm of these patients, especially those that are with high blood pressure and diabetes, and knowing that this is going to potentially be a global vaccine?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. Diversity in clinical trials is an area that we really need to focus on as an industry, and it's something that we have been thinking a lot more about because of COVID. And as everyone on the line knows, COVID's really unmasked a lot of health disparities that we all kind of knew were there, but it's shown them in very stark contrast. COVID is disproportionately impacting communities of color, and those communities are also dying at higher rates than non-white, or than white communities. So it's really awful, kind of the health disparities that it really just unmasked. It was there already, but this virus kind of brought it to the forefront. So I heard Dr. Fauci talk about how you don't want to have the kind of triple threat where communities are impacted by it, they're not included in the clinical trials, and then because of that, they're scared to take the vaccine, so then they're still more susceptible to the disease. So there's been a lot done to increase the enrollment of minorities in COVID vaccine clinical trials. Let's be honest, patients often don't feel comfortable, or sometimes don't feel comfortable with people that don't look like them or can't relate to them. And I know that's our challenge always, is to find a way to connect and identify with the patients that we're working with. But sometimes it's, other people are going to have, if you're from the community, you're going to have an easier time. So I think that's one kind of big longitudinal challenge that we have. They've done amazing work, though. I think both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine way exceeded the kind of traditional enrollment that we see at baseline for diversity in clinical trials.
Speaking to that, how do you suggest that we talk to patients and family members and community members about getting vaccinated if they're concerned about, what are the long-term risks of taking a vaccine? Because we might not know if there was some potential risk long-term. I would say that it probably is less than the long-term risks of getting COVID, you know, but how would you suggest that we go about that?
Quite honestly, the most dangerous part about getting a vaccine is getting in your car and driving to get it, because getting in a car is way more dangerous. The risk of a car accident, and you don't even think about it. The thing about these vaccines, and I think a reassuring factor in the clinical trials, is that they are as large as any other vaccine clinical trial. We're talking 44,000 patients in Pfizer's, 38,000 in Moderna. Each of those people got 2 shots, so you double that. You've got 60 and 88,000 88,000 post-injection data points. They've been following these people 2 months since the second injection, and remember, mRNA degrades basically right away. You get the injection and it's gone within a few days.
Talking about the clinical trials, did these clinical trials include participants with pre-existing conditions or who were immunocompromised? And what are the recommendations for those patients?
Yeah, that's a great question. They did actually. At a certain point, Pfizer expanded their enrollment of their trial from 30,000 to 44,000. And one of the reasons that they made the protocol change was to include people with HIV, I believe hepatitis, some immune compromised type states, to be able to assess the impact of the vaccine in those communities. The other big one is age. So as you age, your immune system kind of ages with you. And so we know that vaccines, tend to have less of a robust response in the elderly. Other vaccines have shown that. And so they made an effort to do kind of subgroup analysis on the elderly. What I've seen is actually the data is quite strong in the elderly.
So I kind of want to transition into vaccine distribution. And I think that this is where the conversation gets a little bit trickier naturally. This is one of the most unprecedented things that we've ever experienced from a public health and medical standpoint. Of course, we've relied on the pharmaceutical companies to develop this vaccine, these vaccines, different options.
Yeah, so I think folks should feel really confident that the FDA is taking all the appropriate steps. They're going through absolutely every kind of step. The only real difference is that it's a public health emergency, so it's an emergency use authorization. To get to the FDA process here in the US, they had to do the trial. They had to find definitive evidence that it worked. I believe the FDA, when they put out guidance, said they were looking for a vaccine that would be at least 50% effective. And these vaccines have been 95% effective. Of course, they're going to look very carefully at all the safety data. The FDA takes all that information and they basically run the math themselves. They look at it all. They kind of recreate the analyses on their own. And then they present that to this external advisory board. So the FDA will have their internal perspective, and then they look for validation from external folks. So it's not just Pfizer. Like Pfizer submitted the application, and I think they clearly believe that they have an effective vaccine based on what they've said. Then it's up to the FDA to say, do we believe that? And then the FDA presents it then again to an external advisory committee of folks that are experts in the field. And they look at the data that the FDA kind of went through and presents, and they decide whether or not, or they make a recommendation that they concur or they disagree. In certain circumstances they do. But based on what everybody has said, it seems like the kind of preponderance of data is pointing in a positive direction. And I am very anxious to see the answer come out.
Yeah. When do you envision us being able to see more of the data? Do you think that will be, is that after the advisory committee, or when do you think it will be more widespread?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think both companies have committed to publishing the clinical trial data in a peer-reviewed journal. So I imagine at some point we'll be getting a New England Journal of Medicine alert that the Pfizer clinical trial data is out there.
How did you find out that Pfizer had gotten a vaccine, and what was your reaction?
About their data?
Yeah.
I probably heard about it on Twitter because I'm on it all the time. I saw it and I was just ecstatic. I mean, it was really just that incredible news. It felt like, pandemics don't end like wars do. And, you think about World War II when there were parties in the streets, it's not going to be the same because it goes out kind of, it fades out as opposed to ending just you sign something and it's over. But that was one of the moments that I think I'll remember for a long time, where it feels like this is the turning point. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's going to be over. It's going to be over. I can't say exactly when, but it is going to be over.